some of you are here for the first time. We're glad to have you here. But basically, we have been doing these events roughly every 2 weeks on different kinds of issues. We aim to, at this point, just get a conversation going. We try and get a mix of people in from different stakeholder groups. People who've been active in the debate, as we have on this issue. We have Biraj and Ritika in particular, and Arun, who's been writing on it. We've had a discussion on Indo-US relations. We've had one on corridors. We had one on education. So a number of different issues, all of which are issues which Brookings India is interested in and hopes to. Bharat, another key player. Glad you made it in time. Come and sit here, Bharat, since you're going to be doing some talking. The purpose, as I said, is essentially to get conversations going. There is no expectation of great revelations or insights. Many people in this room have actually been part of a public debate on the food security bill, but that's the way it is in these events. But informal and exchange of views, no holds barred, no restrictions, no protocols. We are recording for our own purpose, for our own archive. We do plan to put these up on a website at some point, but if anybody has any particular objections, we don't really we have Deepak, of course, from government and a couple of others, but if there is any objection, we're happy not to make it public, but I don't think that's an issue with most concerned. So what I'm going to do is just provide some context to this discussion, and then ask a few people to open up with their views, particularly people who've been very closely associated with the issue, and then throw it open. And we should aim to deal with our own food security at around 9:45, hopefully. But we can go on, if there is interest. The drinks will keep coming. If you want something, please ask one of the people who's helping us out. Now, obviously, we've had a huge and very vociferous sort of build up to the Food Security Act. I was just talking to Biraj, and he's been a very familiar figure in the public debate, but I did not have the historical context which he gave me in our conversation, which is that you can actually trace this discussion back to 2000, he says, and he's been part of it from that point on. But the act is the act now. It's done, it's in place, and there is little point in debating the merits of it, whatever it is, it is. But I think we have to now start looking at implementation and solutions, and every issue that was raised in the debate is a problem, is a potential weakness, is a potential threat to the viability of the scheme, and eventually, I think, the credibility of the delivery. So I want to highlight four factors, four sets of issues. We've had some commentary in the public debate from people here on at least three of them. The fourth one, I'm a little, we don't have anybody from the nutrition side here, but maybe we can just get into that. But obviously the biggest concern that was raised was affordability, and whether in the kind of fiscal conditions we are, even if the intentions are accepted, whether this kind of leap in subsidies was warranted, was affordable. Is it going to create enormous pressures which will either force the government to compromise elsewhere or just risk a fiscal blowout? And we have a range of estimates about what it costs. As I said, the two at the upper end, people who've been associated with that, we invited, but unfortunately couldn't make it, so Ritala and Ashok Gulati. We have Bharat as a sort of somewhere in the middle, or not very worried from the numbers that he puts out. The second issue, which I think came out repeatedly, was whether the existing PDS system, such as it is, can be relied upon to deliver. You're basically taking a creaky system, a very, very weak system, and imposing an even larger load on it. So how is it going to work? Is it going to break the system what are the kinds of investments and institutional changes that we need to make to strengthen the system if we are to come anywhere close to delivering on the commitments. So how are we going to achieve that? What does it take? The third is the impact that this additional incentive, it's an issue that I've been thinking about certainly in my analysis of food inflation and so on, about what this means for the pattern of cultivation. Are we inducing an even greater set of incentives, and I would call them distortions, towards cereal cultivation by creating essentially a larger demand on the part of the government for cereals, when food inflation has actually been driven by so many other things, partly because resources are being allocated away from them. So are we going to aggravate a macroeconomic imbalance in terms of strengthening the pressures on food prices? And the fourth is nutrition. This is an issue which comes up in the debate, and there are various views on it. Whether food security in the form of basically cereal delivery is a meaningful concept. Should we not be thinking about other ways in which to impact on health? One, from the viewpoint of the food basket itself, should we not be incentivizing other kinds of nutrients? And two, from the larger sort of environmental issue, which are things like sanitation and primary health care and so on, not equally important in this process? Do we not need to visualize them as a package? So this is the broad set of issues which I think has characterized the debate, but we have to move beyond the pros and cons and look at solutions. And I hope that this discussion will give us a chance to at least start thinking in that direction. So I'd like to ask Biraj to open up.
I'm really glad that we're not discussing the making of the bill, because Bismarck's prescription that one shouldn't look too closely into the making of laws and sausages holds true, particularly for the National Food Security Bill, given the very sort of divisive debate that we've had over the last 4 years on the bill. And I'm glad that we're looking at something that's even more critical than what is in the bill, which is how do we go about implementing it. So I'll just keep the focus on that. Insofar as the first question of costs, which is, I find it really unfortunate that a lot of the airwaves have been dominated by the discussion on costs, because the question on costs which is not being asked, whatever the figures are, as you rightly pointed out, the figures range from 25,000 crores additional from the ministry to 3 lakh plus crores, as Dr. Bhalla said. But whatever is the cost, I think the question that has remained unanswered is, what is the cost of inaction? What is the cost of carrying a burden of 46% malnutrition for a population of India's size? What implications does it have on the GDP in future years in terms of increased health costs and so on? I think that's been a missing dimension on the aspect of costs. The second issue that's really caught the attention of people is, of course, the PDS. Now here again, when we talk about the bill, and I presume everybody in the rooms read the bill, the public distribution system is just one part of the bill. It's one of 5 main components or 5 main pillars that the bill has. And to my mind, it's not even the most important pillar, even though it's talked about so much in the public domain. The big ticket item, which has got really unnoticed in the public debate in the bill, is the maternity entitlements. Universal maternity entitlements for every pregnant and nursing mother in this country, up from 500 rupees that we have today, which is not universal, to 6,000 rupees. Even in terms of costs, if it was implemented exactly universally without any targeting, which is not imposing a 2-child norm or an age of marriage, which is being traditionally done with most reproductive health programs, you're looking at a cost of 20,000 crores. And fortunately, nobody's been talking about this cost. This is the single largest additionality in terms of cost after the PDS, which is marginally more at 25,000 crores. The second component of the bill is universal feeding programs for children under the age of 6, which is the ICDS. The bill is left out, be that as it may, the 5 other components of the ICDS, which are equally critical, but it still has a supplementary feeding program for all pregnant and nursing mothers, and all children under the age of 6, which is going to cover 160 million children, which is, in terms of numbers, the largest supplementary nutrition program in the world for under 6s anywhere. The third component is the midday meal scheme, which roughly covers the same number. Again, the world's largest school meal program. There's no additionality in terms of the ICDS and the midday meal insofar as the bill is concerned. So all that's happening is that it's being converted into a right. There were already legal entitlements because of existing Supreme Court orders, but now they've been converted into more than legal entitlements as a right with a grievance redressal mechanism that is independent of the state. And lastly, we of course have the public distribution system, which is seeing a massive expansion at one level in terms of numbers of people covered, going up from roughly 36% to 67%, which is the old poverty line, to 67% today. But not really a increase, because for a large majority of people who are going to be covered, there is an effective reduction in the entitlement from 7 kilos per head or 35 kilos per household to 5 kilos per head, which has been the source of enormous confusion in the estimation of costs, because a lot of estimation of costs that have been done assumes that you are maintaining the same level of food grains that would be given to each household, and that unfortunately had become a major reason for this confusion. I think the most critical aspect today is really the delivery. And I'm worried at one level, because delivery is not something that's going to automatically happen. It will require investments. I'm encouraged by the fact that 6 to 7 states, as Jean and Ritika's study showed, have shown dramatic improvements over the last 10 years in the PDS delivery. I'm encouraged by the fact that leakages are down from 55% to 35% now, but which is still alarmingly high. Most of all, I'm encouraged by the fact that wherever the PDS is delivered, which is the states Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, the Himachal, the common lesson in the common thread that underlies the improved delivery is not really reforms, but which is just one part of the story, but it is the expansion of the PDS. And that gives me enormous hope that even though very detailed prescriptions for reforms, which are not mandatory as we would have wanted them to, are there in the bill, even without those reforms happening, states like Orissa, where when the PDS was expanded, even without any of those reforms happening, things improved, simply because the number of stakeholders associated with the PDS was dramatically increased. And our experience in India has been that any scheme that you have for the very poor ends up being a very poor scheme, because they do not have the negotiating power either at the village level or broadly as stakeholders outside of once in 5 years during the elections to change what is happening in the scheme. And what happened in, for instance, in Orissa, unlike Chhattisgarh, which went in through a lot of reforms and had an expansion, was that just the expansion helped, because now you had 70% of the village landing up their ration shop and getting the rations out. So these are encouraging signs, but I do feel that the bill could have done a lot more on PDS reforms in terms of prescriptions for states that could have been mandated. The one thing that I'm completely in agreement with, and that's my last point, is that on malnutrition, I don't think the debate on what are the numbers are really relevant, because in any case we don't have official data since 2006, and it's a bit of a false debate on whether Indian kids are genetically predisposed towards certain height and weight figures, which is being dealt with elsewhere. So I'm not going to get into that debate. But even so, whatever is the number, this bill, if it addresses the issue of malnutrition, it would only be an externality. There is nothing in it in terms of content which actually looks at addressing malnutrition. And I say externality because of two factors. One, because you would have a situation where you can say that because the need for cereals in a household is being met by the National Food Security Act, you would have a situation where households would have more disposable income to invest in protein-rich diets and so on. It's not something that the bill is giving. But more alarmingly, the fact that, as you very rightly pointed out, no society in the world has tackled the issue of malnutrition without dealing with the other social determinants, which are sanitation, provisioning of clean drinking water, and quality primary health care. No one's done it. I don't think we're going to be the first. And I think that this has been the weakest link insofar as the bill is concerned, along with the fact that there is nothing really in it on agricultural production, on addressing the kind of issues that you've raised. Although I don't think that uh, the growth of cereals necessarily is at the cost of millets and pulses because they don't share the same land. In fact, it is, if you look at the data, it is crops like cotton and soya which displace cereals, and cereals don't displace fruits or vegetables or millets in particular, which are grown in regions where you can't grow wheat and rice largely. So I think this, in a sense, is my view. I think the NFSB is a small step, but a very small and significant step in the right direction. And it's still a work in progress in terms of implementation. I couldn't agree more that that the proof of the pudding will literally in this case be in the eating.
So I was preparing along the 4 points that you had given. Now this is something new. Just a sec. Let me. No, no. It would be really nice to have finally the chance to say bad things about the bill. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't mind saying it on record, but we were just fighting this battle with about the bill, which was just not based on facts. That was really the annoying part of it. That if you don't, at least let's agree to disagree, but at least let's have the facts right. And when the facts that are being thrown out, either on purpose or by accident, whatever it is, are so badly wrong, it's really annoying to come out on the wrong side. Anyway, so I'll start with your nutrition point, and I think Biraj has already spoken about that a little bit. In fact, what I'm doing is I'm following an article I wrote for LiveMint, where I said, which was 5 misconceptions about the bill. The first one is that the bill act, I have to tell myself it's an act. The Food Security Act cannot do anything about nutrition. I don't think that's true. Maternity entitlements are really important. Anyone who works on nutrition knows that the most crucial age group are the first 1,000 days, as they say, including the time in the womb. So 0 to 3, actually 0 to 2 after you're born, and the time in the womb. Therefore, maternity entitlements are really the most important thing in this bill, actually, if one thinks. And it can make a significant contribution. It is a cash transfer, which I think will please a lot of people here. So that's as far as nutrition is concerned. Actually, there are one or two other things about the bill that can help with the nutrition aspect. One is that it gives us an opening to create pressure on the ground for the government to start procuring coarse cereals. They're called coarse cereals, but actually perhaps they should be called nutritious cereals because they are more nutritious than wheat and rice. So that opening, hopefully, at least in some states, will be exploited. I've already heard that Karnataka is going to start supplying coarse cereals. In Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, they're in the midday meal program, they've started introducing it. Yeah, so the trends are certainly looking all right. And then the third thing, which Biraj already mentioned, is that when you help people save on their cereal budget, and if they have a fixed budget in their mind for food, then whatever is freed up from cereals will be reallocated to more nutritious things. But this is, this is something that needs to be tested empirically. So that's as far as nutrition is concerned. You mentioned the costs, and I'm guessing Rathin will speak in a little bit of detail on the costs. So I won't go into too much details. Just very simple, the situation today is that the government, today as in March this year, before the bill became an act, was that the government already committed about 1.2% of the GDP to this to these programs, this whole basket. Yeah, the 4 food schemes, including maternity entitlements, and some sort of administrative, etc. costs. Now, this is going to go up for sure. Costing, therefore, is a slightly complicated exercise. Should you just count so Jean made this analogy in an article he wrote. He said you have a computer and then you're upgrading your computer. So your computer was 30,000 rupees. You spend 5,000 rupees on upgrading it. So what is the cost of the computer? The cost of the computer is still 30,000 rupees. It's only the upgrade that, yeah. So whether you look at additional or total, I'll leave that messy part. I had a long discussion with him, so I'm going to leave it to him. But it's going to go up. I think the ministry's costing on food subsidy is by and large right. That the increase, according to our calculations, is going to be about 30,000 crores. They have said about 22 or 25, something like that. But there is one expensive component which they don't cost for, as far as I know, which is the maternity entitlements. In Ashok Gulati's paper, he costs it at about 14,000 crores. I don't know whether that's accurate or not. But anyway, including the two schemes which already exist on the ground, ICDS and midday meals, plus the food subsidy, it's going to be 1.5% of the GDP after the increase. Yeah. Now, this food subsidy is actually an interesting thing. I mean, since we're all economists, a lot of us are economists, I'm guessing this will be of some interest. See, the procurement part of this whole story is something that's not going to go away whether or not there is a bill. The government is committed, and it's going to be politically quite difficult to withdraw from that system. The food subsidy is the sum of the procurement costs, the distribution costs, and these transaction costs. Yeah. So what we say is the food subsidy is actually support to farmers as well as support to consumers. Jean and I are working on trying to split this up into what is the consumer subsidy and what is the farmer subsidy. But anyway, we'll leave that for now. The other thing related, yeah, so there was also a bit of scaremongering around whether or not we can procure this kind of grain. Yeah. So the procurement that is required for the bill is 62 million tons, which is around the level that we're already procuring, or we have been procuring in the past few years. Our stocks are ballooning. It is a huge economic cost to the government to hang on to these stocks. So if you get rid of the stocks through the PDS, you're actually doing yourself a favor. Yeah. So there is the financial cost, and then there is the economic cost. And using PDS food grain stocks to be released through the PDS is helping you, resolve that issue. 62 million tons is 1/3 approximately of total production of cereals. Yeah. Finally, even if everything falls apart, there is a clause in the Food Security Act, which is that force majeure clause, which says that if there's a war or a famine or whatever, this act will not. Yeah. So Ashok Gulati, I think, will be quite happy to hear that. He was quite concerned about this. Finally, on this, third thing, the system. As far as the system is concerned, I think. So I started going when Biraj was in Chhattisgarh. I was spending a lot of time in Rajasthan, and of course, it was also my first exposure to rural India. I had grown up in a city. I had absolutely no inkling of what village life was like. But I'd be so depressed because I'd ask them, "Ration ki dukaan kahan hai?" And they'd be like, "When did you go to get your last ration?" So it was just like a cow look all the way through. It was the same with Anganwadis. They wouldn't know where the Anganwadi centers were. Anyway, from then to now, perhaps because I was so traumatized then, I feel so excited now because I just cannot get over the fact that in some states, not everywhere of course, these people, like when you go there, you see them all over the place with their bicycles and all their grain on it. And like on my computer, I get so excited. I have about 50 pictures exactly the same in different states to show people, like, look, they're getting their rations. Anyway, so I think things have changed a lot. They've not changed everywhere. A lot of my work, at least some of you will know, has been about the corruption in the PDS. So there were some states that always did very well, or reasonably well, or tolerably well, whatever you want to say. These are states like Tamil Nadu, Andhra, and Himachal, where the leakage rates were between 5% to 15%, whatever. But very interestingly, there are these states like Chhattisgarh and Odisha. Now, what have they done? They have actually what they have done is what I consider PDS reforms. What is in the act is also PDS reform, but what these two or three, and then many other states have copied them, is A, they have expanded coverage. So let me first list them. Two, they've reduced prices. Yeah. And then there are certain other measures which are, so these are two measures which increase pressure from below. Yeah. What's happening is that earlier I ran a ration shop. There were 20 people from my village or 40 people from my village showing up to buy it. There was no regular schedule for opening the ration shop, so people would just come whenever, and it's very easy for me to show away 20 people. Now what's happening is that instead of 20 or 40, there are 80 people coming. And one really important measure, which is, I think, pressure from above, is that they've set a fixed schedule in these states which are doing well. They've set a fixed schedule that no matter what, this ration shop has to open from 5th to 10th, or 10th to 15th, whatever it is of the month. So, same time span, everyone is showing up, and then in front of 80 people, you can't tell somebody, just bugger off, I'm not going to give you your grain. It's very difficult. It's more difficult than before. In states like Jharkhand, you can. In states like Jharkhand, what has happened is that earlier these shops were opening every alternate month, and even then, instead of giving 35, 35 kilos, they were giving 20 or 25. Now what's happening is, because of these different measures, it opens every month. They don't give 35, they give 32. And yet both sides are happy. What's happening for the dealer is that earlier in the old scenario, the PDS price was 6 rupees. Market price at that time until 2007-8 was 8 rupees. Yeah. So for every kilo that I was cheated off, I was losing 2 rupees. I'd be like, I don't want to listen to this man's gali. I don't want to be pushed around and shoved around. Let him have my 1 kilo. But since 2008-9, market prices have shot up, and PDS prices in many states have been reduced. So for every kilo that I'm cheated off, I stand to lose 15 to 20 rupees. So that has increased my incentive to make a noise at the ration shop. This is what I'm calling pressure from below. For the dealer, also there is a more incentive to cheat. But what he is doing is that earlier, if he had to make 1,000 rupees, he needed to siphon off 1,000 kilos, because on every kilo he was just making 1 rupee. Now to even make 10,000 rupees, he can manage with much less, because the margins are much higher. And that's the Jharkhand story, that you take a little bit from everyone and you're still managing to keep your your thing burning. Anyway, I'm not justifying the corruption. I'm just saying how the reduction of price is also an important reform measure, which I suspect has also contributed to this revival in a few states. And then there are these pressures from above, which includes the fixing of a schedule for the ration shop to open. It includes computerization. They don't, in many states, they just don't have decent accounting systems, and that makes it very easy to siphon. Nobody is asking the dealer to submit his accounts at the end of the month. He takes the grain at the beginning of the month, but at the end of the month, nobody asks him for his accounts. So he knows there's no accountability in the system. Once you computerize the systems, everyone can monitor. Yeah, and this is actually part of the Supreme Court orders. So it's already underway, and this is one of the reforms that's included in the bill. Anyway, I won't go on and on about the different reforms, but I think the one reason why, even though we see the corruption in the system, we remain hopeful is because this act is building on some of the reforms that have demonstrated their ability to fix systems. Of course, it's not going to be easy to fix it in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, West Bengal. Madhya Pradesh is ghastly. But this gives us an opening where, there are people who are interested and hopefully will contribute to this. Perhaps I should say something about Aadhaar, because that's another thing that there are a lot of misconceptions about. But I've spoken about nutrition, cost, systems, and then the agricultural distortions. Let me skip that and talk a little bit about Aadhaar. Now, Aadhaar actually, first of all, it's not a compulsory reform in the system. Even if it is incorporated into the system, it cannot do a whole lot. There are two things that that it could have done. One is the problem of duplicates and ghosts. So actually in the Aadhaar document, I spent a lot of time reading all their documents. They confuse three different types of problems and call them ghosts and duplicates. Ghosts are actually when somebody who doesn't exist at all or is dead still has a ration card in circulation. Duplicates are when I am entitled to one and I end up getting three or four. And then there is a third problem which they call, which is actually inclusion errors, where I am a rich person working at IIT Delhi and I end up with a BPL card. This problem actually Aadhaar can do nothing about. In fact, today's Indian Express has an op-ed which is perpetuating this misconception that it would have helped in targeting. So targeting, Aadhaar can't do anything. Deduplication, it can. You know, getting rid of ghosts and duplicates, there is some role for it to play. But the problem is we don't know the size of this problem. So this is a debate I've had with people at NIPFP, and I'm really embarrassed to have torn apart their paper. But anyway, the problem is we just don't know whether these duplicates are there and to what extent they are there. I think they are there. Perhaps it's 2%, perhaps it's 10%. But in fact, there are very many different technologies to fix this problem. So one thing is, which has been tried in many states, is just painting all the names on the wall. Yeah. So painting names on Panchayat Bhavan walls, and then everyone will say, hey, how did this Ritika end up getting 3 ration cards? Or how is Ritika's mother's name there? She's already dead. I mean, she's not, but sorry. So whatever. Yeah, so people, because they know that every wrong card over there is denying us. Yeah, so transparency is really important, and transparency can be brought in many different ways. Computerization is another essential step in that direction. And then actually, even if one insisted on using biometrics, which I think is somewhat impractical, you know, because it requires real-time authentication. And I've seen the pilot in East Godavari, which tries to do it, and I can tell you a little bit about it. But even if one wants to do biometrics, we need biometrics, we don't need Aadhaar. Aadhaar has other problems like surveillance and then these linking up of various databases. Anyway, I am not an expert on that aspect, but its contribution to plugging leakages is for sure going to be positive, but whether it will justify the cost, not just the cost of issuing these numbers and doing the real-time authentications, but also the social cost, the disruption it will cause, which it has already started doing. We have seen it happening in pensions and scholarships, where people are being told, if you don't have an Aadhaar number, just too bad. You get your Aadhaar number and then we'll resume your pension and scholarship. So those disruptions actually for poor people are quite terrible. Finally, I'll quickly wrap up about my problems with the act. One is on nutrition. I do feel that they could have done much more. Maternity entitlements is very welcome. Even in the ICDS, there are 6 services, in fact. One is supplementary nutrition, but there's also preschool education, immunization, growth monitoring. All these are protected by the Supreme Court orders, but they're not part of the Act. So that's one thing that it could have done more, and it's really silly to have not done it because financial implications would have been neither here nor there. The other thing I would have really liked is to complete this life cycle approach. Actually, you know, the Act has a life cycle approach starting from maternity entitlements, 0 to 6 for children, midday meals for school-going children, and PDS for adults. The last link would have been pensions, but that's enormously costly. So I guess that got thrown out of the window very quickly. One danger is the problem of over-centralization. This is a larger problem. I can illustrate it with one example, is that the bill says per capita entitlements. Now, the current system in most states, not everywhere, is a household approach. You have a household and then you get your rations. No matter you're 2 members or 20 members, you still get 35 kilos or 20 kilos, depending on which state you're in. Now, the Bill Act is saying you have to make it per capita. So that itself is a big transition, and big transitions do make me nervous. per capita seems equitable, and it is, because if you're 10 people, then perhaps you should get more, and if you're just 2, then you get less. But small households are often the most vulnerable households. They're single women, they're elderly people, etc. And for them, this 25 or 35, whatever kilos it is giving them huge bargaining power to within the family. So if their entitlements are cut, then they become more vulnerable. The other thing is that 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 system administratively is very much more difficult to operate if a new baby is born. So Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh have a per capita system, and I've seen it. What they'll point to their 6-year-old or 8-year-old saying that I've been trying for 6-8 years to get her name added onto my card, and I've just not managed. And these are good states with decent administrative capacity. So that. Then of course there is the scope for corruption, because if somebody dies, nobody will go, and you may not report it, and then you may continue to take that. But also this constant updation of lists. Even if Aadhaar comes in, you can't get rid of that problem, because if the dead person doesn't go and some other family member who's on it can still go, and so the updation problem becomes much harder to live with. So there are a whole range of issues with this transition. This is one example of over-centralization. I think perhaps states should be told, you decide whether you want to do per capita or you want to do per household. I'm going to wrap up. Sorry.
Thank you. I just want to get into the fiscal issues. We get Bharat in first and then Ratin briefly. I mean, you've come out with an estimate which makes things look relatively comfortable. I mean, this is not a blowout scenario that you're describing. It's the incremental cost is well within tolerance, and you've obviously been in a pretty, perhaps not directly, but Surjit has been questioning your calculations and coming out with numbers that are 3 or 4 times yours. So what's the just give us your perspective on what's the realistic? Obviously, you'll say yours is realistic, but why is yours realistic and the bigger number not so much?
I think we did a poor job of writing those articles, because we really don't claim any expertise in cost estimates. Our point there was that whichever reasonable way we looked at it, we just couldn't see where Surjit was getting his numbers from. And we felt that was derailing the debate. To us, the fiscal cost, you may add a few thousand crores here and there, but it wasn't going to be of that order of magnitude. So I can't, I'm not going to claim any special expertise in the cost estimates, but I do think that that it's the reason why I think it's and the reason why we wrote that article is that when you come up with such high numbers which don't have a factual basis, then it really the instinct is for many people is to just stop thinking about the more substantive issues about the food security bill. It's more like saying, we don't want to hear about it. It's going to cost so much. So and that's the end of the matter. The thing is that there are still cost is not my concern, but I have some other concerns which and I really when the act is being implemented, that's what I would like to see some progress on those. Picking up on what Biraj and Kritika talked about, I think the big thing that most people are concerned about is nutrition. So I really wonder why, in some sense, I feel that, the food security bill, it suffered the unfortunate fate of bundling too many things together. If you just had focused on nutrition, then it would have been a different kind of bill, and possibly we wouldn't have had such a divisive debate at all. I just want to point out a couple of things here. One thing that Biraj pointed out, which I agree with, is that it's not that a food subsidy is without any implications for nutrition, even on cereals, because people, the food subsidy covers only a part of what people buy normally for the cereal consumption. So it really releases resources to be spent on other goods, and so we know that cereals have a very low income elasticity, while fruits, vegetables, pulses, milk, especially milk, have high income elasticity. So you'd expect some some things to be consumed there. But the implication is also that if actually it has these effects, then you might as well give them straight away cash. Your what you're providing them as in-kind transfer, the effects on nutrition will not be very much different from what you provide in terms of cash, because in the hands of people it's all fungible. So the I guess one of our main concerns about this, towards in this act has always been that we would have liked, we would have liked to see more decentralization in the bill than what is there. Kritika gave some examples, and in terms of freedom of implementation about the per capita and the entitlement and so on, I would stretch it further. I would say that the bill should have been completely neutral about how you deliver the subsidy, and it should be really up to the states to decide whatever they want, and they could even adopt for some hybrid approaches if they wish. I just want to flag one concern because that has not been talked about. To me, the real scandal in food policy over the last 20 years has been the fact that we procure so much more than we need for PDS. This is not just a matter of the recent past. It's been there for 20 years. We have been procuring far in excess of what we distribute through the PDS, and so we have this recurrent crisis of huge food stocks and so on. And this is not a problem that's going to go away, and there's nothing in the food security bill that can address it. It requires changes in the practice of food policy, and if in fact there is some reason to believe that a very unthinking mechanical approach by the central government towards the Food Security Act could even worsen this problem. I'm not so sanguine about the fact that we are procuring today to supply these requirements of the National Food Security Act, but given that we tend to procure well in excess, and given that tomorrow, if the central government falls short of in any way, there could even be action by the Supreme Court on this. So you would expect the bureaucrats to play safe, as they always do, announce another bonus on MSP, and end up procuring a lot. So this requires a lot of thinking about how, if you're going to have this, how you're going to manage the procurement problem. I'll stop here.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I've very little to add because I hope I'm the last person agreeing with everyone who spoke ahead. But I don't think the fiscal issue as such, unless you think 1,30,000 crores is a problem, which you're entitled to, is the core issue here. I think, to put it bluntly, there were two estimates, and I'll speak about the second one in a minute, that came out which were way off the 1,30,000 crore mark. One, as you've very eloquently shown, and I agree with you, technically, was a result essentially of an arithmetic error. The second I'll talk about in a minute. But this does have resonances to the old NREGA debate, and there are two misconceptions here which I'd like to sort of correct in terms of the fiscal intention. And also make the point that in a fiscally constrained year, when the finance ministry came up, and Deepak is here, I hope he'll agree, with the 1,26,000, 1.26 thousand crore bill, it wasn't done without a lot of, very close examination of what these numbers mean. It's not that the food ministry came up with this number and Ministry of Finance said, okay. There was a lot of blood on the floor, and everything was micro-examined. So that number, in that arithmetic sense, was actually pushed down. So if we take out Mr. Bhalla's arithmetic errors, and I believe that's all there is to it, then I think there are two serious concerns. There's Prachi Mishra's recent estimate. And this is a policy quantity. She says there that one of the things that have not been estimated, I think she's correct, is the fact that the kind of public infrastructure investments you will need to make in delivering this quantum of food will need to be accounted for in terms of an increase in the recurrent expenditure of government. And that's normally correct. Government is underfunded in its delivery mechanisms. But that is right and proper. And if it does happen, to the extent that it does happen, I think it is possible to view that as happening with economies elsewhere. Because there are lots of areas where government is how do I put it, excessive in terms of its manpower deployments. Just a matter of changing manpower or restructuring district administrations. The cost will not be neutral, but I would underestimate Praj's costs a little. Then there is the issue of grandfathering and mistargeting. And yes, that will happen. But there, even if you don't accept Aadhaar, I think it's a bit paradoxical. Because if you're able to spend on public infrastructure better, you will grandfather, and grandfather is a policy decision, you will mistarget less. So I don't think it's true to say that both these costs will happen at once. And therefore, again, I would tone those costs down. Now, then there is the argument that the bill will be badly implemented at whatever cost. And I have no answer to that. And that is what I meant by there's a bit of history here. Because in NREGA, we went through the same policy cycle. I think it's good that we put an end to it earlier than we did in NREGA. First, people said it's going to cost, I don't know how much percent of GDP. Then they said it's useless because, everything in government is misimplemented. And then my standard response to that is, okay, that's true of defense, right? So if this is implemented better than your average defense project, what's your problem? It's all right. Or is it not? I mean, you're saying, no, we can afford to be profligate on defense and misspend money to the extent of, 1400% cost estimates because that's national security. But when it comes to food security, then we cannot. So I think, if you take away the rhetoric, then we have estimates that are broadly ballpark. If you have decided to provide food security, I don't think 1 to 1.3% of GDP is an excessive number. It is a fraction of what we spend again on external security. And therefore, I'd like to see more credible fiscal arguments. Now, will there be cost escalations due to other things? My only concern there is yes. I think at the macro level there are two issues that I think you were illustrating. One, I think Ashok Gulati also pointed out, which is what impact this will have on prices due to changes in producer behavior, and what incentives this kind of macro rollout will have, especially well implemented, on producer behavior and therefore on food price inflation. I don't know. The second, of course, is the odd thing of the substitution effect. Now, we're alluding to this, and paradoxically, in the relatively richer parts of India, the richer states of India, you would expect people to start aspiring to consume things other than cereal because people are smart. They don't have to wait for the government of India to tell them how to acquire better nutrition. They know how to do it. They go and eat dal. They go and eat vegetables. And they will try and do that. Traditionally, when we have done this in better times, we've managed to import things. And as you know, the macroeconomic constraints now are such that our immediate ability to sort of contemplate macro quantum imports of lentils from Turkey are difficult. There is always a solution. If we had better relations with Pakistan, we could do it cheaply, but then those are parametric. So there is a macroeconomic concern, I think, there, and you were alluding to this, and this does bother me. So to summarize, I think that the sort of fiscal estimations that we are looking at, it's difficult for me to think they'll go about 1.5 lakh crores. Okay, if you want to raise it by 20,000, and that is change for the government of India. Frankly, 20,000 crores you can find elsewhere. I don't think the grandfathering costs and the mistargeting costs will be high if the bill is implemented well. And if the bill is not implemented well, then it's money down the drain anyway. So I think that argument is a bit spurious. I am concerned and I remain concerned about the macroeconomic impact of the incompleteness of the bill when it claims to address nutrition, not because that claim will not be met, but because people are smart. And when they get cheaper food, they may substitute and seek to substitute, and they may have a rude shock when they go to the markets, which will result in dissatisfaction for them, but more importantly, macroeconomic instability for the country. And this is something I think on the fiscal side we need to focus on now, rather than on whether this bill is affordable or it's going to cost more than 1.5. I think that we can close and move on to other things. Thanks.
Yeah, and I want to get Arun in, but just a thought that came to me. You can say of assuming or attributing to specific actions multiplicity of outcomes. So, food security bill, we should solve food inflation, we should solve nutrition, we should solve, inequality, we should solve efficiency. So if we use the assignment principle or bring it into play and say, well, the objective of the food security bill is to provide food security, and that's it. Everything else is secondary. Everything else has to be dealt with if there are problems with another instrument that is more directly related to food. So food productivity has to be dealt with the food productivity strategy, not with the food security bill. So I think the ultimate judgment is going to be whether the food security bill actually provides food security. Maybe we can come back to that point at the end. But Arun, would you like to come in here? You've also written and commented extensively on the issue.
So in my article that I wrote, I basically argued that we have to focus on the macro because that's not being focused on. And there are two parts to it. One is the political part, the other is the economic part. The political part, of course, is that we have to build citizenship. People go hungry, it comes out the distribution that is part of the macro. So the individual is unable to address all these issues, and therefore it is at the level of the state that some of these issues get addressed about what kind of technology we use in the economy, what kind of employment we generate, what's the capital intensity of the investment that's taking place. And today the capital intensity of our investment is very low, and therefore employment generation is indeed a problem, and therefore income generation becomes a problem, and therefore poverty and food availability also come into the question. So when we think about it from the fiscal side, it's already been pointed out that the subsidy bill will go up, but the question is where should we subsidize? What is more essential? Because there's subsidies of different kinds, and in the budget, if you look at the receipts budget, tax expenditures amount to about 5.5 lakh crores rupees. There are other subsidies which go to the poor, but these subsidies go to the better off sections. So the question is, where is the trade-off? What do we subsidize? Which kind of thing should be subsidized? And I think it's better for us to then release resources. So without subsidy now because the market prices are much higher than the prices at which they'd be offered the grain under this scheme. So that will get into other consumption. So therefore, those prices will rise. And if those prices rise, inflation would rise. But I think for the poor, because the bulk of their consumption basket is food, I think their inflation would stabilize. But for the lower middle class and others who don't get covered by this, their inflation probably will climb. So inflation would be a problem, again, a differential problem. But for the organized sectors, I think because they are inflation indexed, even though they're small, but they are relatively more inflation indexed, they will probably be able to tackle the problem of inflation. So in that sense, I'm not that worried about the kind of impact that it might have on inflation. Now, regarding the growth rate of the economy is slowing down at this point of time. The rate of growth, I think, is going to go below 4% at this point, given the trend. So there is a deficiency of demand, especially of mass consumption items. And if this subsidy goes at the bottom level, there will be an increase of demand for mass consumption items, and that would perhaps help the growth a little. Now, the subsidy is only 40,000 crores, so it's not going to have that huge an impact, but nonetheless, it would help in doing something on the growth rate. So I think as far as the growth rate is concerned, inflation is concerned, the fiscal side is concerned, so from the macro, I'm not that worried about what the implications of this bill would be from the macro side. Perhaps it will be relatively all right as far as the macro economy is concerned. There is some concern about what would happen to our current account deficit, and I think this is where the difference is that when this subsidy goes to the poor people, their import intensity of consumption is very small. So unlike if you subsidize the urban, you subsidize the better off sections, there the import intensity would have been much higher. Here the import intensity being much lower. I'm not that worried about the current account impact on the current account deficit either. So in a sense, people also talk about what would happen to the subsidy in terms of storage. Because you require much larger amount of food grain to distribute, because at the moment you're covering about 620 million, you plan to cover about 820 million, so 200 million people extra. But I think this food is getting distributed much quicker, if the scheme works, that is. If the scheme doesn't work, so today, because the takeoff from PDS is less, so you have 80 million tons of stocks, which costs a lot, and a lot of that gets wasted. So my own judgment is that if food gets distributed quicker, then rather than having food in the food grain storage, it'll be in the people's stomach, and therefore in that sense, that food subsidy could also come down, because what is being lost in terms of wastage, that would go and you'd at least receive 1 or 2 or 3 rupees. So I think in some sense that food subsidy could also go down rather than go up. And the storage requirement, if the distribution is good, would not create a problem. I think the major problem that comes up, apart from what earlier speakers have said, is identification. How do you identify these additional 200 million people to whom you'd give additional stocks? And that is where I think the problem of governance, problem of corruption are very strong. And that is where I think the crux of the problem will be. But if you manage to do that, and I think corruption is there in India and everything, but because there's corruption, say, in 2G, we don't say we won't distribute 2G now. Because there's corruption in, say, coal allocations, we don't say we won't do coal allocation. So corruption is a constant, and that we have to live with. So I think that is a problem that I think needs to be flagged and needs to be looked at. How are we going to identify and distribute to these extra 200 million? And there I'll stop.
Thanks. I'd like to get Deepak and then Ajay. And Deepak, you've been sort of watching it from the inside in terms of the whole fiscal debate, and you do have a perspective reflect, that the scheme was not implemented to the extent possible. I think two issues here. One is, is this, as Ratan is very perhaps charitably saying, hard numbers and so on, looking fairly realistic. But what's the 67%? I mean, why was that brought in, and did that become sort of a red herring, or does that actually support the leverage and bargaining thesis that that Biraj and Ritika have pointed out? So, for example, if I was part of this scheme, would my interest in seeing it through add value? Would there be a positive externality from that participation?
Yeah, I'll come to that second one. The first is, I think I agree with almost everything that's been said, which is that the fiscal cost is not outrageous. It's something that we are able to afford. The macroeconomic consequences are not great. And these are views that we've internally thought about and took that decision very consciously. And everything about if there's something that can get the food out of the PDS stocks. And it's a shame to have these stocks lying around when we are eventually paying for all of it in one form or another. So all these things are actually pretty much agreed. The 67% is, in a sense, a way of trying to cap. We were all struggling with, you don't want it to be a runaway macroeconomic consequence just at this point of time. And so that's just a backhand way of trying to cap it at some reasonable level. Now, what are the things that we in Ministry of Finance would have been worried about, or would have been wanting to see a little bit more? I think we'll wait to see what the consequences are. As you rightly said, we'd like to see what happens with the because we know some states it's working quite well, and maybe it'll push some other states to kind of get into the competitive side and administratively do it well. Entitlements do create that political pressure. So we'd be certainly very glad to see that happen, that it turns out to be a scheme that is more efficient than the old PDS. Now, what are the two things that I think, that's my personal view, that we would have liked to have seen? I think we really needed to have cracked some of the problems in the old style PDS, which is the difference between cost of acquisition and the economic cost is far too high. I absolutely do not see why there's huge inbuilt inefficiencies, and so that makes me that needs to be cracked. As you said, assignment problem not with this act, but certainly we would like to see a little bit of moderation as to the expenses of moving this grains in a sense. The second thing is, I think we did not learn enough lessons in terms of innovations from the rest of the world as what to do on the nutrition side, as all of us have talked about. One of the issues that I think from a global perspective that we needed to really have thought about on food nutrition is if you look at some of the places which have the lowest rates of lowest rates of malnutrition or access to food. I shouldn't really say nutrition, access to calories and access to food. One of these surprises is that very often it is availability and universal availability and access to cooked food. Simple wheat turned into bread. All over the Middle East, you have the least rates, and the costs are we must think about some of this because we are fast urbanizing. And you can't, it's not simply supplying the things. That's the second one. I think we didn't innovate enough. And the third is that for the really vulnerable, for the absolutely vulnerable, the 5% of the, I don't think, and I think it was the wrong thing in our rush to give this bill, and I'm looking at you guys because you should have pushed for this much more, that you left out. We gave up, and that's a terrible shame. We gave up on the bottom 5%. There was a feeding program built there. We didn't pick it up, and I think it's going to. But I think that's the question about Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is innovating. Tamil Nadu is way out there with cooked food, with the vulnerable groups, and we miss this. And I don't know how we miss this. I think we'll regret it for the next 20 years. So we'll have a lot to answer for as intellectuals, as not having done this when we should have done it. So that's my two.
Yeah, this actually, Tamil Nadu, Amma canteens and so on, demonstrating some of the points you're making about delivery of cooked food. That seems to be a big success. We don't know the costs yet, but the impact seems very high. Is this not a model? I mean, is centralization going to actually prevent the spread of innovation, or are states, even with the sort of the structure that has been almost imposed from above, still going to provide an opportunity for states to start looking at their own context and looking for ways to do what you said? In Tamil Nadu, idlis won't work everywhere else. Other kinds of ways to. We'll get you in. Ajay, your yeah. Okay. Shh. Absolutely. Take a mic. You need a mic. So we can't let you go without being on record here.
No,
It's on. You switched it off.
Now it's on. Some of the elements that Virat and Ritika were referring to are actually factored into the costing that Prachi Mishra has done. And she comes out with numbers. If you put it in relative to GDP, her lowest estimate is 0.4% of GDP. Her highest estimate is 0.7% of GDP. So looking at a ballpark of something like 0.5% of GDP. Additional cost, yeah. Now you put that against what Ratin was mentioning, these tax expenditures, which nobody ever, talks about in any debates, that's 5% of GDP on average every year. You factor in things like fuel subsidies, and these are huge compared to the additional cost of the food subsidy. And this is a perspective that needs to be brought in because, the people are sort of getting hysterical about, we can't afford it and so on. So this needs to be put into perspective. Rakin also talked about defense and what goes on that front, the subsidies there. But just tax expenditures, and these are contributions to very, very private interests which are being catered. Okay, that's one. Now, the other thing is I wanted to mention, the real issue over here is not really the food subsidy, but what's going on the procurement front. And several people have referred to this. Bharat was mentioning that, that is the big challenge, and we are procuring much more. But, unlike the impression that you may have got from Bharat's presentation, the idea of procurement was never just to provide food for the PDS. It was to provide assured income to farmers at the outset of the Green Revolution so that they could be very secure in their income to remove uncertainties. And you got into this trap. Today you are in a situation where the main grain bowl of wheat, for instance, in Punjab, wheat and rice, so major producer of rice today, Punjab, the government just does not know how to handle this. Recently been there discussing. They just do not know how to diversify farmers, encourage them to diversify away from these two crops because you don't give them guaranteed income anything else. And they are now thinking of, if they could provide some guarantees in something else through, the agricultural, marketing corporations and so on that they have, so that farmers have a more balanced incentive structure and then, a less distorted cropping pattern. So that's just what I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's really the point about other instruments or other institutions addressing problems. So, as opposed to the food security bill taking care of everything simultaneously. So, Ajay, your perspective, you're looking at the PDS from your independent evaluation perspective. You've been in the position for a couple of months now, more or less.
6 weeks. Yeah.
6 weeks. So, outsider, fresh, and
Right.
No baggage.
Actually, I came here just to, I'm my old friend Vikram. We've been in college together and haven't seen him for a long time. I just came here to enjoy his hospitality. So I'm happy to listen to other people. But
There's a price for coming here and enjoying
That's right.
Vikram's hospitality, as many people over the last 15 years have discovered. So.
anyway, thank you, Vikram and Subir, for the invitation. It's really wonderful. I was here once before when Vikram was absent, so I really enjoyed that one. I think we were talking about tapering that time. So this is a kind of tapering problem also. 2, 3 things. First, let me just say that I don't know. They couldn't find anybody else to do this job, so I've been asked to come back to India after almost 35 years to establish the newly independent evaluation office of the government of India. It's an attached office of the Planning Commission, like I guess the UDI or whatever. There are several of these offices. So I've just come back after 35 years. So I have lots of questions that I can raise, but I don't have any answers because I haven't done the evaluation yet. But I did a study actually on this topic 35 years ago. It's an IFPRI research report number 39. If anybody wants to go and see it, you're welcome. And it's like a deja vu because it was all the same issues at that time. It's just the numbers are so much bigger now. That's all. Okay, exactly the same issues. Procurement price too high. Storage costs too high. The Food Corporation of India bungling everything. And now it's the Food Corporation of India plus a lot of other people bungling everything. and the issue price was, well, too low or too high, it didn't matter because very few people were actually getting the grain in the first place. So this is 35 years ago. There's a research report of IFPRI that Professor Raj Krishna and I did together at that time, right? So now it's like, okay, the numbers are 10 times bigger or 20 times bigger, but it's the same problem magnified many times over. So the question, I think, is the political economy that we have to ask is, why are we in the same story 35 years later, except we've just magnified the problem so many fold? So I have more questions, actually. One is, I read, of course we've all read, and we are all great admirers of the great Professor Amartya Sen. So his biggest insight into this was when there was famine. The famine didn't occur when there was a shortage of grain. The famine occurred when there was a shortage of purchasing power. Right? So to fix a problem of lack of food, you got to give people purchasing power. You don't necessarily have to give more food. So of course you can say, well, if you give cheaper food, you're actually giving them purchasing power. But then why not? So the question I have is, to him and to everybody, is why not give them purchasing power, right? So that's one set of issues. The other is that the whole world is moved on in the last 20, 30 years from what I call product-based subsidies to people-based subsidies. As you go from a developing to an advanced country, people get out of product-based subsidies and get into, taking care of people and having more transportable social protection systems for them. And yet we are stuck in a time warp of product-based subsidies, fertilizer, food, diesel, kerosene, whatever, and we are still stuck in that. And the food security bill actually takes us deeper into that, because now it legislates it into a right. So this is something. I went to Iran. My last job was I was covering UN programs in Asia and Pacific. So I went to Iran, and I was surprised the mullahs have decided that fuel subsidy is too costly for them. So they're actually moving to cash transfer programs. And by the way, they have some of the most impressive, nutrition and fertility programs in the world. They're scoring better than Turkey on many things. So for me, the issue is now we're stuck in this, where every country that has gone from low income to middle income has gone out of product-based subsidies into, basically transportable social protection systems. So because people are migrating, people will be migrating, people will be moving. So they need to have, we need to have systems that will be identified with people that can be carried with them, obviously. And maybe this one has that feature, I don't know. So that's another question that I have. The third question is sort of the more macro question, right? So here we've set up a system where in the first UPA 1, we kind of had a situation where the urban sector did very well, right? All the NSS data also shows that. So now we have a situation where we have turned the terms of trade, going back to, I'm going back to Amir Bagchi, which we all read in, Pranab and I probably read in college, right? The whole terms of trade debate. So you've got this perverse situation where now you've got this APC. He's not here, Gulati, but that would be one question for him. how is it that these prices have gone up so much? So in the past, we used to have a situation where you could say, okay, there's a monsoon has failed this year, there's a food price shock, so food prices rise, right? But there was no such thing as food inflation. It was, but to have an inflation, you need macro policies that will accommodate a supply shock. But if you have for 4 years in a row keep raising procurement prices the way they have been raising them, and more than that, you have changed your policy to say it's not I'll buy this much grain and then I'll stop what I need for my buffer stock. I'll buy whatever is coming on the market, right? So you have an open-ended purchase policy at much higher relative prices. Now, one justification is, well, the world relative prices have moved in favor of grains, so you need to have relative prices here moving in favor of grains also. I mean, that could be one argument. But you have the perverse situation where we are now buying all this grain. Last year, by the way, we had the record export of grain from our country. We've never had so much export of grain. I mean, this is all, of course, arranged exports. And then you have this massive cereal inflation that is driving something called food inflation, and still everybody's trying to figure out what the hell is food inflation, right? Because you can't have inflation in a kind of a macro model without some accommodation in fiscal policy or monetary policy. Now, of course, if you have huge fiscal deficits that are arising, the subsidy has gone up by at least 1% of GDP, total subsidy bill, right? So that itself will fuel some inflation. Then you've got NREGA, which has raised rural wages, and that could be contributing to some food inflation, but also overall inflation. But ultimately, I think, we've mismanaged the food side. Now, people can say, well, that's the procurement side, and this is the PDS side, and you can separate the two, but it's very hard to separate the two. And we got to think of it as some sort of a complex whole. Anyway, so I don't want to say I have answers because I've just come back after a long time, but it's a movie I saw before, and I'm seeing sort of, I don't know which sequel this is, but for me it's sequel 2, but for many people here it may be sequel 5 or 6 that we are seeing. So anyway, I'm going to start this evaluation. If people, I'd love to have people come and say, I'd like to help you out or work with it. It'll be several components as you will have to look at. But there'll be the macro side, there'll be the procurement side, there'll be the handling side, and there'll be the crude side. Now, some people, I agree with some of the comments on Aadhaar, that because I went to see Mr. Nilekani, and who I admire greatly, and he gave me a report that he had chaired, a committee that he had chaired, where they would like to basically Aadhaarize the entire PDS system. By that I mean they will put Aadhaar monitors in every shop, and when you go in, you punch in your Aadhaar number, and you will that will trigger the whole system to say so and so got so much grain and blah blah blah. And then there was this idea of, that wasn't probably Nandan, that was somebody else. I saw a report from the World Food Program with Boston Consulting Group that they would do GPS tracking of every truck. I mean, so there's going to be some electronic monitoring of all this with some NSA type giant computer that's going to keep track of all this. I don't know if that's the solution, but I mean, so these are the suggestions that are being made on how to improve. So we have to think of a much simpler way of doing this, with more incentives, more local solutions. So last thing I want to say, Egypt, because Egypt, everybody thinks of all these problems they're seeing in Tahrir Square, and I mean, you know, the whole Arab Revolution. So I worked in Egypt also quite a long time back, and they have subsidized bread, right? At some point, they never changed the price of bread. Like, it went to equivalent of 1 rupee of jowar that we have now. And so I said, oh, where's all this bread going? Because the bread is god awful, right? I mean, you can't even eat it. But people are buying this bread. And then you find there's a whole slew of studies which show a lot of it is going for animal feed. So I don't know, I'm not an expert on food grains or cereals, but if you make it very cheap, you incentivize people to pay more attention to it. But then you also have ingenious people who will find many other uses for it. So I don't know where all this will head eventually. But anyway, I have some questions, so I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. So we have about maybe 15 minutes for general participation. We can go longer, but you know, dinner is also there. But just the animal feed connection reminds me. I recently saw a list of India's top agricultural exports in descending order, and the top one was guar gum, which is used for fracking. The second was basmati rice, and the third was buffalo meat. Yeah, so you know there's an animal feed connection there. But thanks for all these inputs. It's great sort of education for me certainly, and I hope for everybody. But let's throw it open and you know see if you have some thoughts and comments and counters, and you know at the last 2 minutes perhaps you just give the lead speakers in a sense an opportunity to clarify. Or Pradeep?
I've also done some of these calculations, and my estimate is total cost of the food subsidies is going to be something like 1 lakh crores, and the additional cost will be something like 40-50,000 crores. And that's right now the diesel subsidy alone costs something like that, 1 lakh crores, 90,000 crores. Okay, so if we just took out the diesel subsidy, that pays for your food subsidy. Okay, question I had was about your estimate of 25,000 for the maternity entitlement. How much? Yeah. So, I mean, it's very simple. We have something like 2.5 crore births. And out of that, if let's say 1.5 get covered in this, cost will be something like 9,000 crores. It can't be 25. Yeah, but you know, your wife is not going to go for that, right? So, I mean, it can't exceed 10,000. It's very simple calculation. And I just had one comment on this thing. You're saying that BDS, these extra stocks won't be used up that we have under with this food security bill. That I found a little surprising. Wouldn't, when we start giving so much more grain, wouldn't that use up some of the stocks? That I found a little surprising. Yeah, Bharat was.
Yeah, but
Okay.
That's a hypothetical situation that they over.
So that's it.
Must respond. You know, I'm sorry, but I'm not an economist. I'm so sorry. But you know, I have a slightly different perspective on this. When I used to work in government, whenever we never wanted to do anything, we would paint the project so large and so amorphously that nothing would ever happen. So my impression is that this so-called food security bill has been devised very intelligently so that nothing changes in India as far as food security is concerned. at the central level. Now, I have a couple of reservations on this bill. I, for one, do not understand why this is happening at the central level at all. I mean, what does the central level have to do with food security, or for that matter, nutrition? You know, these are issues that should be handled at the state level. If necessary, the central government, like our friends in the World Bank and the ADB, should use their convening powers, disseminate knowledge, bring people together, get them to talk, let them build a consensus around the broad objectives of what should be done, and then everybody finds their own way. It's irrelevant how you do things. How does it matter? Why should you prescribe how things should be done? If you want to prescribe anything, link central aid to outcomes. The process is completely irrelevant from my point of view, from the perspective of the central government. So this is the first question I had, that the whole concept of having this sort of legislation. I think Arun Shourie did a study where he found that there were 110 legislations that are, even if they disappeared, nobody would feel the pinch. So there now the wind would be 111, because Tamil Nadu has been doing this for some 20, 30 years. So other fellows have been doing it in their own way. On the larger governance aspects, I personally think that the only good thing that this may push is the use of the UIT. Because whether it allows you to target people well or not is actually again a choice of what you intend to do with the UID. The UID doesn't tell you anything except the name of the person, and the person is a resident, the gender of the person, and I think that's about it. But it does tell you that there is only one such unique individual, and you can put on any other application on top of that. It could be car registration, it could be crime, it could be food entitlement, it could be anything that you want under the sun. And unfortunately, since Milekeni is leaving, I guess the UID will also die a quiet death after he's gone. So, that is going to be buried possibly along with the food security. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. On the nutrition thing, this is work that I've done, it's published, and the results are actually quite surprising, which is that if you look at this whole 46% figure that keeps getting bandied around, which has formed, in a sense, the moral justification for the FSB. What the data says is the following. At birth, Indian children are exactly on the WHO norms. Between 2 and 6 months, they fall behind significantly. 6 to 12 months, they grow at after adjusting for that initial fallback, grow at exactly the same rate as children anywhere else. 12 to 18 months, they fall back further. 18 months to 3 years, they actually grow faster than the WHO norms. Now, if you think about the Food Security Act, it's simply not addressing this problem, because this problem is happening prior to children getting onto cereals. All right? So if anybody is under the impression that the Food Security Act is going to help children gain weight, forget it, it's not happening. Because the problems are elsewhere, and I think the point that Vijay made is the valid one. There are countries which have actually licked the problem, Bangladesh being the best example around us. And there's, I think, something we need to learn. So let's put that aside and then ask the question, what is it that the FSA is going to be doing if this is not it? It is basically the nutrition of children above the age of 3 up to old age, right? What are the vulnerable populations in the 3 to, let's say, 90 age group? And here I would submit that the Food Security Act is seriously deficient. And this really takes us to the point that Deepak made, which is the bottom 5%, which used to be covered under the Annapurna Yojana, which doesn't even find mention in the FSA. Okay? Number one. Number two, 6 age group, which is very vulnerable, we presume the ICDS covers it. ICDS covers less than 17% of children in that age group. So who are we addressing? And I would probably guess that 17% would be dominantly in urban areas. What about the old age? In the old age, again, what we do know from nutritionists, it's not food grains that you want. So the food grain is really meant for the age group between 6 and 60. And is it anybody's case that there is serious nutritional deficiency in terms of calories in that age group? Assume that there is. Then let me give you the following fact. Under the current dispensation, the FSA is going to give roughly 1/3 the cereal requirement for the average person in India. 2/3 will have to be bought from the market. At current prices, that's going to come to about 15 rupees per kilo for meeting just the cereal needs of the average person. Supposing we didn't have the Food Security Act and the entire excess stock of Food Corporation of India was actually put out into the market through open market operations. My suspicion is that, this is the point you are making, that the market price of food grains would drop from the current 25 rupees to probably something like 16 or 17 rupees. You would be not very different from where you're going to be with the food security. So, and all of this is assuming that all other associated costs of the FSA are completely ignored. So there is an issue and that we really need to think about in terms of what it is that we are trying to achieve. To my mind, I think there's only one really, really, really strong argument. And that is that this act will in fact make food security in terms of getting PDS shops opened in every locality into a reality. The work that we had done, had done 12 years ago, suggested that in the poorer states, the PDS shops are all concentrated in the urban areas. The rural areas had done, and this is basically the point that Ritika made, saying, people didn't know. But now they're starting to spread. They're starting to spread because the state governments have taken those measures. Question is that with the Food Security Act in place, will the impetus towards spreading the PDS system into the remotest areas really gain momentum? If it doesn't, I think we have lost the game.
I think we should, we have 5 minutes. Any of the initiators want to
very quick responses, just very quick responses. I think the elephant in the room really is about PDS versus cash transfers. A lot of people have alluded to it directly or indirectly. And I think, I don't think evidence on that is that clear. I'm not the Right to Food campaign or our office. We've championed cash transfers in form of maternity entitlements, which have found their way into the bill. We've championed direct cash transfers in form of pensions, which have not found their way into the bill. But we were never in favor of replacing food with cash for the following reasons. One, because the global discourse on right to food is essentially, it covers 3 aspects. There's access, there's availability, and there's absorption. Absorption is to do with micronutrients. It has to do with the nutrition component. Access and availability is what a part of which is what this bill is going to address. Now, in terms of access, when we speak about the right to food, it's either provisioning of food or the means to acquire it. I mean, globally, this is an accepted definition that's widely, it's signed on to by all countries in terms of the voluntary guidelines. Now, cash would ensure, it will not ensure access because availability of food grains is not universal. I mean, talking about movies, Mr. Chibba spoke about this being a sequel to a bad movie, but Mihir Shah the other day was reminding me that he said, look, we seem to have forgotten. Why is it that we brought about this whole system of the FCI? And he said, go back to the movies in the 50s and 60s and way into the 70s. The biggest villain in a Hindi film was the hoarder, the food hoarder. And we have come out of that situation. That is part of the popular imagination, the hoarder as villain. And therefore, I think we need to reflect whether, we are, when we talk, comparisons with Brazil are, and I've been to Brazil many times, look at this. Brazil is 70% urban, 30% rural. We are exactly the reverse. The Bolsa Familia program, which is a cash transfer program, is only one element of the Brazilian, decline in poverty rates. And by the Brazilians' own estimate, it's number 4 in their priority of things that they did right. Brazil also has universal pensions, it has school meal programs, it has a very successful public canteen program where cooked meals are provided. And now the biggest program that Brazil has launched, which is in excess of the money that they're going to spend on Bolsa Familias, is the public procurement program. They have mandated by law a new legislation which came up a year and a half ago, that 80% of procurement for public feeding programs, particularly the midday meal scheme, has to be from small farmers. So the Brazilian story is not just about cash transfers. There is no evidence in India to suggest that cash transfers are amenable to less corruption. We've been doing pension transfers for years, and we see in a country where cash is difficult to inflation index because of the volatility in food prices, particularly post 2008. How would you inflation index a coupon or cash? We are in a situation where NREJs, where we've tried out cash transfers, because of the lack of financial inclusion, we're not reaching out to people. People don't have bank accounts. The number of bank branches have effectively come down. The banking correspondent model hasn't taken off. We are a long walk away from financial inclusion. So I think there are a number of issues. And of course, then the issue of gender inequity, which is far less in Brazil as compared to India. So I think some of these need to be considered. We can try out urban pilots. We can see in areas where there are very high penetration of banks, where everybody has a bank account, and markets and availability of food grains, whether this works in India or not. And I guess it will. It will in urban pockets. And I think we should try it out. And in the spirit of Brookings, let me end by agreeing with the Ministry of Finance and disagreeing with Ritika. I completely agree with him that this bill has let down the 5% of the poorest. And let me assure you that it was not because of the lack of trying. Till the very last minute, we did have the public canteens, the community kitchens, the destitute feeding programs, and it's not something that's unique to Tamil Nadu. Chhattisgarh's been running it for years. The Annapurna Dal Bhat program, where you can get a meal of rice and dal and vegetables for 5 rupees, unlimited. Maharashtra pioneered it with Jhumka Bhakar program during the BJP Shiv Sena reign. Number of states have been running it. When they ran it, it ran well. And it's a real pity that we don't have it in the bill. Tonight is a night what we call, I work with the urban homeless, and a large number of people are going to spend the night out in Delhi, sleeping on the streets with the urban homeless. And this is one segment that I've worked with closely. Food grains are of no use to them. Because if you're an urban homeless person, there is no way that you can collect 35 kilos and use it. You don't have a place to store, you don't have a place to cook. And what serves the urban homeless much better in Delhi are the community kitchens, particularly the ones that are run by the government, the Aapki Rasoi kitchens, where subsidized meals are available, because they have cash to buy the food, or they can depend on cooked food from elsewhere, but they just cannot access the ration system, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to use it. The disagreement with Ritika is on Aadhaar, and a lot's been said on that. And Nandan's not here to defend himself. And I'm not defending him because he's a friend, but also because I really believe in this, that I don't think it's really without its use. I agree that we may not know the extent of deduplication errors, but one of the great things that the UID could have achieved, and I say could in the past tense because I think we've missed the boat, not because of the activism of activists, but because of the internal contradictions with the government, within the government, which have made Aadhaar fail, is the fact that you could have had entitlement portability. Unlike NREJ, which is tied down to a panchayat, food is an entitlement that could have been made portable using Aadhaar. Aadhaar is by no means the only tool to do it. Chhattisgarh is doing it using the RSBY cards under the core PDS program. And there is, there are many ways to skin a cat. But I think Aadhaar had this great potential of creating, as had been pointed out in the report of the Finance Ministry, which of the committee that Mr. Chibber referred to, of creating a universal entitlement which anyone could have accessed from any place in the country. It can be done by other means, but I also think that there were merits in that. And on the costs, Aadhaar was not developed for the PDS. It was not developed for the food security bill. It was universal to almost every program that the government had. And if you calculated the duplication costs in each of these programs, you would have a situation where perhaps it would justify the costs that we would be putting into that effort. So I'll end here, and thank you very much.
Okay, I'm warming up. Aadhaar makes me warm up. I'm going to be very quick. Yeah. I don't want to stand between dinner and everyone. I would like to say that people should read a bit more about Aadhaar. I've thought very hard about this, and nobody has been able to give me a very good justification for what it's going to do. On the fact of the particular thing that he brought up, which is portability of a PDS entitlements, the lack of portability is coming from the way the PDS is structured. It is because my ration card is tied to a particular shop. If you give me a smart card, which I can swipe at any shop across the country, and if you have a computerized system, you can achieve portability. Once you fix that system, then Aadhaar is superfluous to it. So it's not really Aadhaar. And, there are just so many instances where we have been given the slip, and actually Aadhaar is not just about what it does or does not do for these social welfare programs. There are a whole range of issues which I don't understand very well. Like, who's going to bear the cost of these real-time authentications? Apparently, it's not going to be the government. It's going to be a system that's self-sustaining. It's a financial. Yeah, so we have to think about those aspects. My only plea is, because there's no time and because even I want some dinner, is that do read some of the things. I'm really glad someone who I generally consider on the other side, Ajay, has actually, spotted some of the weaknesses of this program. I like Nandan too, but we mustn't confuse his idea with him. So that's as far as Aadhaar goes. The other thing, one recurring theme has been about nutrition and whether the Food Security Act will do something about nutrition. I think it will do something. It won't fix the problem for, like we said, we need 10 other things to fix it. But even if it doesn't do anything about nutrition, zero contribution to nutrition, it's still very important because it is a source of economic security. And this is in the same paper by Himanshu and Abhijit Sen that Rinku referred to, and Jean and I have been working on similar calculations. We find that this program contributes 20% approximately at the All India level to the reduction of the poverty gap. So if you look at only people below the poverty line, how much closer do they move to the poverty line because of the PDS transfer, including the leakages? We find that 20% of the poverty gap is wiped out. In the states where it works well, like Tamil Nadu, Chhattisgarh, it's about 60% or 40%, depending on where you are. So I think, and that economic security is very important. When sometimes when I go for these TV debates, they say, oh, logo ko machli de rahe hain, unko fishing nahi sikha rahe hain. Nobody can learn or think about fishing or acquiring skills or anything on an empty stomach. I can't teach on an empty stomach, and I'm sure most people cannot think ahead. So, and there are actually a substantial number of people who are in that situation. I know the NSS numbers are just 2%, but that definition of sleeping hungry in the NSS itself is very restricted, and there are other surveys which are giving slightly higher numbers, whether it's 17% or 20%, doesn't matter. The fact is that people remain very vulnerable. They fall sick for 2 or 3 days, and then they don't get work, and people start sleeping hungry. So that economic security aspect and the food security aspect, as Subir rightly said, is actually quite an important objective and goal in itself. There were 1 or 2 other things, and then I'll stop. I promise. I promise I will stop. Just one. This is a last thing. This point about inclusion and what impact it will have. I think the idea actually goes back to Hirschman, where he, the thing he talks about in Exit, Voice and Loyalty is that when you have it's in our self-interest to make it work. So that I just wanted to bring that up. And finally, on technologies, somebody mentioned GPS. There are all kinds of interesting things. In Chhattisgarh, they use yellow trucks. All the trucks that are carrying PDS grain are painted yellow. So if that truck is seen offloading its grain anywhere other than a PDS shop, everyone knows that there's something wrong. These numbers, complaint numbers are on the truck, so you can immediately call up. There are all kinds of interesting initiatives at the state level from which others can learn. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to even try and summarize this given the minutes, but I just want to make the point because so many of you have talked about successful, not just experiments, but programs in the States. I've been off and on in the consulting business, and I do talk to consultants a lot. And one thing that strikes me is every time they do a project with the state government, the first question that the client asks is, what are other states doing? And it's always been a sort of puzzle to me as to, given the number of forums we have for interstate coordination, and this is at different levels across different ministries, why this ignorance persists? Why do state governments not take the trouble or make the effort or are pushed, if this is something the center can do rather than actually design the framework? Why are state governments not learning from each other? In cheap idlis is not 20 years. It's when I was in school in Chennai that we used to get the 10 paisa idli. And so this is 30, 35 years ago. These experiments been tried. Tamil Nadu is not successful because of things it's done today. It's because it's been doing things in the same vein for the last 35, 40 years. So I think that's a big message, and that's, I think, something for all you guys in the central ministries, including Ajay, who's supposed to be independent now. Why are states not learning from each other? What's stopping this flow of knowledge? I think that's an important thing for us to. So thank you all for participating. I hope you found it valuable and provocative, even if you don't agree with everything that people said. Dinner is served, so please join us for our own little version of food security. Thank you.
Thanks.